The Battle of Rabaul, also known by the Japanese as Operation R, was fought on the island of New Britain in the Australian territory of New Guinea in January and February 1942. It was a strategically significant defeat of Allied forces by Japan in the Pacific Campaign of World War II. Following the capture of the port of Rabaul, Japanese forces turned it into a major base and proceeded to land on mainland New Guinea, advancing toward Port Moresby. Hostilities on the neighboring island of New Ireland are also usually considered to be part of the same battle. Prelude. The small Australian Army garrison in New Britain, known as L.I.H Force, numbered 1,400 men and was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel John Scanlon. It included just 716 frontline Australian Imperial Force soldiers from the 22nd Battalion, deployed from March 1941 as fears of war with Japan increased. The force also included personnel from a local militia unit, the New Guinea Volunteer Rifles, a coastal defense battery, an anti-aircraft battery, an anti-tank battery and a detachment of the 10th Field Ambulance. The 22nd Battalion Band, which was also included in L.I.H Force, is perhaps the only military unit ever to have been entirely recruited from the ranks of the Salvation Army. A commando unit, the 130-strong 2-over-1 Independent Company, was detached to garrison the nearby island of New Ireland. The main tasks of the garrison were protection of Unacarnor, the main Royal Australian Air Force airfield near Rabaul, and the nearby flying boat anchorage in Simpson Harbour, which were important for the surveillance of Japanese movements in the region. However, the RAF contingent, under Wing Commander John LaRue, had little offensive capability, with 10 lightly armed Kakwira training aircraft and 4 Lockheed Hudson light bombers from No. 24 Squadron. For the Japanese, Rabaul was important because of its proximity to the Caroline Islands, which was the site of a major Imperial Japanese Navy base on Truk. The capture of New Britain offered them a deep-water harbour and airfields to provide protection to Truk and also to interdict Allied lines of communication between the United States and Australia. Following the capture of Guam, the South Seas Force, under Major General Tomotarou Hori, was tasked with capturing Kavieng and Rabaul. As part of Operation R, a brigade group based on the 55th Division, its main combat units were the 144th Infantry Regiment, which consisted of a headquarters unit, 3 infantry battalions, an artillery company, signals unit, and a munitions squad, as well as a few platoons from the 55th Cavalry Regiment, a battalion from the 55th Mountain Artillery Regiment and a company from the 55th Engineer Regiment. On 14 January, the force embarked at Truk as part of a naval task force, which consisted of 2 aircraft carriers, Kaga and Akagi, 7 cruisers, 14 destroyers, and numerous smaller vessels and submarines under the command of Vice Admiral Shigeyoshi Inoue. Battle. Starting on 4 January 1942, Rabaul came under attack by large numbers of Japanese carrier-based aircraft. After the odds facing the Australians mounted significantly, LaRue signalled RAF HQ in Melbourne with the Latin motto, Nos moratori te salutum us, the phrase uttered by gladiators in ancient Rome before entering combat. On 20 January, over 100 Japanese aircraft attacked in multiple waves. 8 Wirraways attacked and in the ensuing fighting 3 RAF planes were shot down, 2 crash-landed, and another was damaged. 6 Australian aircrew were killed in action and 5 wounded. One of the attacking Japanese bombers was shot down by anti-aircraft fire. As a result of the intense air attacks, Australian coastal artillery was destroyed and Australian infantry were withdrawn from Rabaul itself. The following day, an RAF Catalina flying boat crew located the invasion fleet off Cavite, and its crew managed to send a signal before being shot down, as the Australian ground troops took up positions along the western shore of Blanche Bay where they prepared to meet the landing. The remaining RAF elements, consisting of 2 Wirraways and 1 Hudson, were withdrawn to Lae. Once the aircraft had departed with a number of wounded, the Australians destroyed the airfield. The bombing continued around Rabaul on the 22nd of January, and early that morning a Japanese force of between 3,000 and 4,000 troops landed just off New Ireland and waded ashore in deep water filled with dangerous mud pools. The 2/1 of a Stone Independent Company had been dispersed around the island, and the Japanese took the main town of Cavite without opposition. After a sharp fight around the airfield, the commandos fell back towards the Soak River. That night, the invasion fleet approached Rabaul, and before dawn on the 23rd of January, the South Seas Force entered Simpson Harbour, and a force of around 5,000 troops, mainly from the 144th Infantry Regiment, commanded by Colonel Masayo Kasunos, began to land on New Britain. A series of desperate actions followed near the beaches around Simpson Harbour, Caravia Bay and Raluana Point as the Australians attempted to turn back the attack. The 3rd Battalion, 144th Infantry Regiment, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Kueda Ishiro, was held up at Vulcan Beach by a mixed company of Australians from the 22nd and the NGVR. But elsewhere the other 2 battalions of the South Seas Force were able to land at unguarded locations and began moving inland. Within hours, Lakunai Airfield had been captured by the Japanese force, and Scanlan ordered every man for himself, and Australian soldiers and civilians split into small groups, up to company size, and retreated through the jungle, moving along the north and south coasts. During the fighting on the 23rd of January, the Australians lost 2 officers and 26 other ranks killed in action. Only the RAF had made evacuation plans. Although initially ordered to turn his ground staff into infantrymen in a last-ditch effort to defend the island, Leroux insisted that they be evacuated and organized for them to be flown out by flying boat and his 1 remaining Hudson. Australian soldiers remained at large in the interior of New Britain for many weeks, but L.I.H force had made no preparations for guerrilla warfare on New Britain. Without supplies, their health and military effectiveness declined. Leaflets posted by Japanese patrols or dropped from planes stated in English, "You can find neither food nor way of escape in this island, and you will only die of hunger unless you surrender." The Japanese commander, Hori, tasked the 3rd Battalion, 144th Infantry Regiment with searching the southern part of the Gazelle Peninsula and securing the remaining Australians. Over 1,000 Australian soldiers were captured or surrendered during the following weeks after the Japanese landed a force at Gazmata, on New Britain's south coast, on the 9th of February, severing the Australians' line of retreat. Aftermath. From mainland New Guinea, some civilians and individual officers from the Australian New Guinea Administrative Unit organised unofficial rescue missions to New Britain, and between March and May about 450 troops and civilians were evacuated by sea. The Japanese quickly repaired the damage to Rabaul's airfield, and Rabaul became the biggest Japanese base in New Guinea, and a linchpin to their defences in the region. The Australians tried to restrict its development soon after its capture by a bombing counter-attack in March. A handful of L.I.H force members remained at large on New Britain and New Ireland and, in conjunction with the local islanders, conducted guerrilla operations against the Japanese, serving mainly as coast watchers, providing information of Japanese shipping movements. Of the over 1,000 Australian soldiers taken prisoner, around 160 were massacred on or about the 4th of February 1942 in 4 separate incidents around Tull and Waitavilo. 6 men survived these killings and later described what had happened to a court of inquiry. The Australian government concluded the prisoners were marched into the jungle near Toll Plantation in small groups and were then bayoneted by Japanese soldiers. At the nearby White Arvalo plantation, another group of Australian prisoners were shot. The Allies later placed responsibility for the incident on Masao Kusunos, the commanding officer of the 144th Infantry Regiment. But in late 1946 he starved himself to death before he could stand trial. At least 800 soldiers and 200 civilian prisoners of war, most of them Australian, lost their lives on 1 July 1942. When the ship on which they were being transported from Rabaul to Japan, the Montevideo Maru, was sunk off the north coast of Luzon by the U.S. submarine Sturgeon. By late November 1943 the Japanese force in Rabaul had been reduced by air power, a hefty part of it on November 5 from Halsey's aircraft carriers Saratoga and Princeton, and thereafter no Japanese heavy ships ever came to Rabaul. In December 1943, during the Battle of Cape Gloucester, U.S. Marines landed in western New Britain and subsequent Allied operations on New Britain gradually restricted the Japanese force to Rabaul, as part of Operation Cartwheel. In November 1944, the Australians returned to the island when advanced elements of the 5th Division landed at Mackinac Bay on the south coast, and relieved the U.S. 40th Infantry Division. The Australians then conducted a number of other landings around the island as they conducted a limited advance north, securing a line across the base of the Gazelle Peninsula between Wide Bay and Open Bay. After this, they sought to isolate and contain the main Japanese forces around Rabaul. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, it was found that there were still around 69,000 Japanese troops in Rabaul.